two new reports have broken down the safest countries in the world to live for 2023. I'm going to tell you where you can actually get in from an immigration standpoint and where you can keep more of your own money with lower taxes. There's a couple of new reports that have come out. One is reported by CNBC. It's the Global Peace Index mashed up with the Economic Intelligence Unit, basically a report of the safest countries in the world for folks who want to live nomadically. There's also a report called the Global Health Security Index, which talks about the places that are best prepared for epidemics and pandemics and are among the healthiest countries in the world. And so I'm going to share with you these lists of countries. I'm going to share with you some data about other countries that shows you why you might not want to rely only on these lists. And I'm going to tell you where you can actually get in to live a safe life if you want to live overseas. I'm Andrew Henderson. I'm the founder of Nomad Capitalist. We have, for a decade now, helped high and ultra high net worth individuals legally reduce their taxes offshore, protect themselves and increase their freedom with dual citizenship, and take advantage of all the opportunities that the world has to offer. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. So the top safest countries for nomads, number one for many years, Iceland. Hard country to get into. They've got a digital nomad visa now that you can use to actually go and spend some time there. That's not a long-term solution. So if you're looking to move beyond just taking kind of 6 months as you bounce around with a laptop, not going to be as easy. Number two is New Zealand. Very expensive investor residence program. There is some tax friendliness if you're willing to pay something. There is a path to citizenship, and so if you want that high-level country, I think there's better options, but New Zealand's up there. But they're always kind of talking about making it more difficult to get into New Zealand, and I think there's better options. Portugal, a place that a lot of folks are moving on self-sufficient visas, golden visas. They are a little bit backlogged right now, but certainly Portugal offers a certain amount of tax friendliness, not the world's best tax friendliness. I would even argue if you're a seven-figure earner, not Europe's best tax friendliness, not by a mile actually. Czech Republic is 4. That's harder to get into unless you're a European citizen. You can become a European citizen by getting a passport by descent let's say you have an Irish grandparent, or let's say you want to go and make a donation to Malta. If you do that, then you can go and live in the Czech Republic. Otherwise, it's harder to get in. Hungary is a relatively safe country. I've been there. Croatia is relatively safe. I think Montenegro next door doesn't get enough credit. And I think countries like that often don't make these lists because they don't look at like tiny little countries. They look at like the countries everyone's buzzing about, and then they just rate those. So there's probably places that are very similar that aren't on the list. Number 7 is Germany, which I will tell you many of my friends who live in Germany disagree with. Number 8 is Norway, which my friends in Norway do agree with, even though they don't like the high taxes. Australia is number 9, and then Mauritius is number 10. That's a place where we don't talk about that much, but you can make an investment in real estate. You can start a company. You can live relatively tax-friendly in Mauritius. And so those are their top 10 safest countries. So of those, Mauritius, Croatia actually is a good capital gains tax incentive, but immigration was always a bit more challenging. Mauritius, to some extent, Croatia, and Portugal probably to me stand out most on that list, with New Zealand coming in if you are very wealthy at the end of that list. It's pretty hard to move to Norway, and why would you necessarily want to? Beautiful country, have Norwegian roots myself, but difficult place to go and a very expensive place from a cost and from a tax perspective. Same with Iceland. Right, Czech Republic, Hungary, difficult. Again, if you're a European citizen, you could just go and live there. But I'd be looking at Portugal, and perhaps Croatia. Again, Montenegro next door could be interesting. You can get a residence permit there. You can go for 90 days at a time. They don't bother you. Mauritius, kind of an off-the-radar place if you want to be out there. Buy a villa, get residence in Mauritius. Not a bad deal. Let's talk about the other list, the Global Health Security Index. You have some overlap, Australia and Germany and New Zealand. You also add France at number 4, Spain at number 5, again, Norway, Mexico, which is very interesting, one of the most open countries for traveling during the pandemic. Mexico is on there. Easy country to get a residence permit. Very opaque tax system. If you're going to live in Mexico full-time, you definitely need the kind of holistic planning that we do, where we look at all the different factors. What's your tax liability in Mexico? You do not want to become a tax resident in Mexico. It is going to follow you around like a scarlet letter. They're going to be calling you Hester for the next 3 years of your life if you get sucked into the Mexican tax system. People think, oh, they'll never find me. They don't find the other expats. Yeah, you're making more money than the other expats. Maybe they will. They are finding more people. Estonia, a little bit harder to get into. Portugal again, and then Hungary. So a lot of the countries that are deemed the safest are also the ones that are best for health. And so the ones, again, that stand out, Portugal, Mexico, New Zealand, if you're very wealthy and don't mind jumping through some hoops, Again, if you're a European citizen, any European country opens up to you, and that's why I think if you are wealthy, rather than going to New Zealand, I would rather just make a donation in Malta, get their passport, and now I've got, rather than 2 countries I can live in, I've got about 30 countries I can live in, and I can move between those, and I'm a lot closer to the action, and my passport is just as respected, and it comes a lot faster, because I'm getting it in 18 months. So those are the safest countries on the list. Now, let me pause at this. You want to strike a balance when you're looking for a place to go between what is statistically the safest. You want to understand statistics, and you also want to understand the real world. We have talked about how, for the murder rate, for example, the U.S. is in, depending on which report you believe, the bottom quartile or the bottom third. So the U.S. has one of the higher murder rates in the world. I lived in the United States for 27 years. Nobody ever murdered me, and nobody's ever murdered you. And so I'm not saying don't live there, but I'm saying be aware that if you're sitting in a country like the United States saying, oh, this is as good as it gets, this is the safest place in the world, you are very much incorrect. And so you want to use the statistics to guide our decisions while also making real world assessments. The 4th highest murder rate in the world, by the way, is in the U.S. It's the U.S. territory. It's the U.S. Virgin Islands. And so you want to be aware that your country is not necessarily the safest. But do we need to go to the other extreme of moving to Iceland? Not necessarily, because there's this great misunderstanding. Every time someone runs for president, I'm moving to Canada if that guy wins. Really? How do you move to Canada? It's not as easy as just showing up. And the same thing applies to countries like Iceland and Norway. They don't want, I mean, everybody would be moving there if it were that easy. And so let's look at some places that are not on these lists where they look at, again, these reports often look at the places that everyone's talking about. And that's why you always see Portugal, you always see Austria, you always see Australia. You know, there's 252 countries in sovereign territories out there. Why is it always the same 10 places? I'm not saying they're bad, but I'm saying there's certainly a Western bias. Let's look at the lowest murder rates in the world. Japan doesn't show up on most of these studies because I would argue you can deal with property crime. You can hold your purse more close. You can take some sensible precautions. I'm not saying you want to do that. There's a lifestyle question of, in parts of Latin America, do you just want to not wear a nice watch? Do you want to not drive a fancy car? I've met very, very wealthy people in Mexico. They drive a very average car. They don't want to draw attention to themselves. That's a lifestyle question. Is that worth it? If you already don't drive a fancy car, then hey, you'll blend in just fine. People will think you're wealthy. If you want to drive a Bentley around, then there's certain places where you may not want to go. But I would argue you could prepare for property crime a lot better than for violent crime. And so if we look at violent crime, lowest murder rates, Japan, then Singapore. They're making it more accessible. If you're an entrepreneur, you can get in. You're going to pay more in taxes than you would somewhere else, and you're going to have more restrictions, and you're probably never going to become a citizen. So Singapore is a great place to be, but you have to see, if I'm making a holistic plan, I'm going to ask you 15 different questions to see if Singapore makes sense for you, if it's worth the cost, right? If you can set up shop in Dubai and keep your taxes at zero, why deal with the hassles in Singapore of, family reunification and all that when you can do it in Dubai faster? Other lowest murder rates. Luxembourg, they've got a golden visa, not a great tax regime, but if you want to live in Luxembourg, you can go there. So that's an example of a country that, like Portugal, has an accessible golden visa program or an accessible self-sufficient visa that's open to everybody, unlike some of the European countries where they might give you a digital nomad visa, but they don't really want you to move there long-term unless you're getting a job, for example. And those jobs may be hard to get. Indonesia, also a very low murder rate. Not a residence permit I would necessarily want to get from tax purposes. They do have the new digital nomad visa, which is tax-friendly. Again, you're not getting citizenship, you're not getting longevity, but that's a place that could work. And so why are we always focused on high-tax Australia, high-tax Norway? Nothing wrong with those countries. I mean, I think Australia has certainly been not a bastion of freedom in recent years. I can't complain about Norway. If they want to pay high taxes, so be it. But do you? Right? Indonesia actually has a lower murder rate than Norway. Norway's next above Indonesia. So you're getting the same thing, much lower cost of living. You can live in there for years under a digital nomad visa and pay no tax, and you're going to have the same safety. Oman's on the list. A lot of Gulf countries are on this list. They often don't get reported. That doesn't match the Western media narrative. People would flip out if they saw CNBC talking about how UAE or Oman are the safest. Switzerland's on there. They've got a high-value residence program. This is the benefit of having European citizenship, and if you have no other way to get it, again, Malta's donation program is valuable because you can live in Switzerland and pay half the tax as a non-European citizen. And so if you have someone in the family tree, or if you can get Malta citizenship, you can move to Switzerland and pay half the tax as everybody else under their lump sum program and have one of the safest countries in the world. That is, while not the easiest country to get into, more accessible than a place like Iceland, which tops the charts. So a nice balance of it's really, really safe, but it's not quite number one. This is an example of, yes, I tell you to go where you're treated best, not where you're treated a little bit better, but we can't control the fact, and I don't encourage you to fight the fact that Iceland just really isn't issuing residence permits en masse. So Switzerland in this case is good enough. The UAE is next, and even China has one of the lowest murder rates, they say. If you look at violence against women, for example, violent crime against women, Liechtenstein, absolutely number one best. Azerbaijan, Armenia, and I've kind of seen that in my time in Armenia, Lebanon, a few other countries that I think are hard to kind of validate. But Serbia's there, Albania's there, Japan's there, Andorra is there. So if you're a woman and you're looking for safety, it may be places that you're not familiar with. Germany scores high on all these safety lists, and yet violence against women is higher in Germany. Does that mean that if you live in Germany, you're going to be the victim of violent crime? Not necessarily. But if we want to go based on statistics, or if we're looking for a lower cost, lower tax place to leave Europe, then there are plenty of places where you can go. And so the safest places aren't always what you think they are. I look at the lists to guide me. I do believe in statistics, but I also believe that you want to look beyond these lists because there are tiny little countries, as in the example of Montenegro, one of the lowest crimes. I mean, they were a little bit higher on this list in terms of murder and violent crime, but they're still pretty low. I spend time in Montenegro. I don't think I see any crime at all. Now, you may not see crime where you live in the United States, but the idea is you can find places that are off the beaten path that nobody's talking about that actually statistically work. They may not be quite number one, but they're accessible from an immigration standpoint. They let you reduce your cost of living and or reduce your tax obligation. And so if you're going to move, you want to have the best conditions you can. This is what we do at Nomad Capitalist. We create holistic plans for folks. If you have a $60,000 a year freelance income, that's going to be a different need than someone who has a $6 million a year income from an online business. And so the person who has the high level income or the high net worth is the person that we help to figure out where can you be safe, because that's a concern for you and your family, where can you work towards a second citizenship to make sure that you're in the driver's seat, and where can you have a great lifestyle that allows you to keep more of your own money. If you put all those things together, it becomes a more complicated picture than just saying Iceland is number one or Australia is number one. In reality, those are not countries that you would move to if you're a successful person who wants all the benefits of living overseas. And I'm not going to move just to live in a safer country. I'm going to move to get all the benefits that I can possibly get.